Good morning, and welcome to St. Paul, United Church of Christ, Keokuk.
The scripture comes to us today from Psalm 121 in the Old Testament. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. And from Romans, Abraham justified by faith. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. It was not through law that Abraham and his offspring received the promise that he would be heir of the world, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing and the promise is worthless, because the law brings wrath. And where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also of those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that are lost. God add blessing to the reading and hearing of the word. Would the children come forward for the children's sermon? Who wants to be the lion? Somebody want to be the lion? Oh, say grrr. Louder. Here, see, we're going to have to amplify that a little bit. Oh, very good. All right. Can you be the lion? Can you say grrr?
Grrr.
Ah, very good. Okay. How about you? Can you be the lion? Grrr. Very good. Okay. I got to give me my lion back there. Can you be the lion? You can say grrr. I think a lion lion can probably do whatever it wants to do, right? Because lion is very strong, and this is actually from an old Bible school that we had a while back. And lion is very strong and can do whatever it wants to do, right? But it's part of creation, and it can't really do everything that it wants to do. Does it catch everything that it chases?
No.
No, because sometimes it's too slow. Sometimes it's not sneaky enough. And we can't do everything we want either, you know that? No matter how powerful we feel, we need to have someone. Who do we need to have? Because we can't do everything all by ourselves. Who do we need to have?
Lord.
Who?
Lord.
Yes. That was quite good. Yes. So we need the Lord, right? Can you say that real loud?
Lord.
Yes. Can the congregation say it on 3? 1, 2, 3. Lord. The Lord, yes. Okay, so we need the Lord. That's exactly right. When we live well, you know what happens? We know we need God. We know that we need God every single day. We get up in the morning and we say to ourselves, Lord, I need you to get through this day. And then at the end of the day, we say, Lord, thank you for helping me through this day. All right? So all the way through, we need God. And there's not a time when we don't need God. So let's pray about that, all right? Let's pray. Let's give God thanks that God is here to help us. Lord,
Lord,
thank you
thank you
for helping
for helping
us.
us.
Amen.
Amen. Pennies for heaven.
Pennies for heaven. Yes, it's that time. We need to collect pennies for heaven. We're doing really well with that. The last couple of months, we actually topped a couple of $100. Part of the reason for that may have been that Ash Wednesday evening, I surprised people by having pennies for heaven, and we got more dollar bills than we normally do. So the kids are really helping us a lot in helping us to do the stewardship of the church. And why do we do that? We do that because we want to make sure that we get a lot of disciples for Jesus Christ. We want to make sure that we get a lot of people who believe in Jesus Christ and understand that they can be forgiven and helped through Jesus Christ. So that's why we do that. And we also believe that everybody, no matter what their age, can help us to do the mission of the church. And when the kids bring around these bags with the pennies, they're helping us. They're doing a very important thing. So, and we're doing a very important thing because we're putting to work money that normally would just be laying around on counters, sitting around in baggies, maybe being around in little jars, stuff like that. Actually putting it in a jar that I had sitting around in the bedroom that was full of pennies for years, literally years. So God would not call that a responsible use of resources for God's kingdom, blessings for God's kingdom, and that sort of thing. This is the season of Lent, so we think about ourselves, we examine ourselves, and when we examine ourselves, then we see certain things. We see certain things about how maybe we have fallen short, or maybe we have gotten into some habits that have limited us in some way. And one of the habits that we have really derives from something that we do as children, which is healthy, and that is that we do more things for ourselves. So, for example, when I was younger, I was not really doing that much around the farm. I think maybe my parents at that point didn't think that I was old enough to do various things. So I thought to myself, well, I can do this and that. So one day, we milked cows, and one day I put together all the milking machines and got them ready for milking. And I was very proud of myself. I thought to myself, I've done that all by myself. And then, you know what? I was required to do it all by myself every single day. I learned something from that. A learning experience. You see, we like to do things by ourselves. Sometimes it has unintended consequences. So time I would have had for playing around doing this and that now was spent putting together milking machines. So despite everything we might think about our wisdom and that sort of thing, it was good for me to do chores and so forth, but it wasn't what I had intended. So we find ourselves constantly in such situations in which we do things for ourselves. We think we're going to get one outcome, we get another outcome. We want to, though, and we just just have this impulse to do it all by ourselves. Sometimes we think it's not going to be done right unless we do it. And then we become very controlling. So we have to control everything. We're like people who have to keep all of the beach balls in the pool under the water at the same time. One of them is going to pop up. We can't control everything. But have you known people who are very controlling about things? Yes. You want to do it all by yourself. If it's going to be done right, you have to be the one who's doing it. So we have a natural tendency for that. Sometimes because of sin, it's gotten out of hand, and we've forgotten how dependent we are upon God. Eve, for example, wanted to do everything for herself when she thought she was going to evaluate whether or not to eat the fruit. And she was going to listen to the serpent because, well, I'll just listen to him, listen to what he has to say. Well, that was already turning her back toward God. She wanted to do something on her own by herself, which God had really forbidden her to do at this point. But nevertheless, she went ahead and did it anyway, and the end result was that sin came into the world. Sometimes when we want to do everything all by ourselves, we forget how dependent we are upon this cross that Jesus came into the world and suffered and died for our sakes, so that we would not have to try to lift ourselves up by our bootstraps and try to forgive our own sin, which is kind of a silly thing to do because we simply can't do it. We simply cannot do it. But we want to do everything for ourselves. We want to do everything for ourselves. And the end result is basically that we find out that we can't. It's frustrating. But nevertheless, we go our own way anyway. And the end result is that we run into difficulty. While I lived in the Upper Peninsula, we would have tourists who would decide that they could do everything for themselves. So they'd go into the woods in a place called the Keweenaw Peninsula, and regularly they would get lost. Well, the locals knew those woods, and they could find them. But they would get lost. Oh, they haven't shown up for supper. Well, better go find them. And they knew generally what area to be looking in and that sort of thing, because they thought they could do it all by themselves. Now, if you're a man, for example, you also don't need to really have a map or a book of instructions, right? For putting together that swing set or for finding a place. You can do it all by yourself, right? And the end result is sometimes that you're lost, but you don't want to admit it. It's just traditional that people will speak of men in relation to that. Women are maybe the same way, but nevertheless, quite often we think we can do it all by ourselves. We don't need anybody else. But the fact is, we find that we need somebody else all the time. We really don't live all by ourselves, totally sufficient to ourselves. Even if we go out into the woods and we find that we must then build a shelter. Then we find that we have to hunt for food. And then we find that we need a hunting license to do that, or we're poachers. We might want to fish, but then we need a fishing license, or we're poachers. And we find, as some people found out during the 60s when they wanted to be subsistence farmers, that we find that it takes all of our time to do that. So we're a slave to that sort of thing, rather than depending on the civilization that we have around us. The idea of the rugged individualist is a myth. It's something that just does not exist. Even Daniel Boone and others always had the idea that they would, yes, be isolated to an extent, but only isolated to the extent that they could still see the smoke of the other cabin out there in the distance, just in case they needed somebody to help them. So we need help all the time. There's a healthy sense in which we are independent, but there is also a sense in which we want to be independent from everybody and everything, and we fly in the face of God. And that is something that is just not possible. So this idea that we don't need anyone else. I have had some friends, for example, who have basically been looking forward to retirement because they're not going to need anyone else. Well, the first thing they discovered was they were hanging around the house all the time. And their mate didn't like that, you see. So initially, that was the thing that they often found. They found that they didn't have enough time. They wondered how they could even have worked at any time, because time seemed to be they seemed to be a slave to time, because so many things filled their time. There were many things that occurred. We're never really independent of everything. God didn't make us that way. We can't do it all by ourselves. We weren't designed that way. Even though quite often, if people get irritating or something like that, we think to ourselves, well, I just want to be by myself. Well, that doesn't work out very well in relation to that. And there's another thing that works in there, and that is that when we did decide that we were going to do it all ourselves, when Eve did disobey, her will would no longer obey her in the same way that it did in the past. If she wanted to do something, her will might veer off and do something else. It's kind of like you're driving a car and all of a sudden it decides to go out into a field, you know. You have many times, possibly, when you've intended to do something, and in fact, you've done just the opposite. There were a couple of houses that I sold once, and both times, I only did a couple of them, both times the people said, I will never buy a house like that. I will never buy a house with these characteristics. Both times they bought a house with exactly those characteristics, you see. I have one convert to my credit, somebody from Malaysia. He said, I will never believe in Christianity at one point. He said, I'm never going to, and that's when he was fighting this feeling that he was going to be converted somehow, and that he loved Christ. I will never, and surely he was baptized. You see, our will is different sometimes. It moves us in ways that we, and of course the New Year's resolution that you're never going to eat chocolate again or something like that, well, that goes out the window pretty fast. All of those things. We need God so that we can actually stay on the right path. This cross shows us the right path. We need God because we're not designed to live by ourselves without needing anybody. We need church for the same reason. You know that convert that I talked about? He actually was advised by his mother, who didn't believe in Christianity, to go to churches and become part of a church, because there he would find caring people. So his mother cared about him and sent him to a church for that reason. I don't think she ever expected that he would become a Christian, but nevertheless, that's what occurred. But that was the reason why he was originally sent to church. Because of sin, we don't always follow our own will. So we can't do everything ourselves for that reason as well. We're not even completely in control of ourselves. We need the help of others, and we're not even completely in control of ourselves. And the end result is basically that unless we have God guiding us, unless we follow this path of the cross that we follow during Lent, we're essentially going in all kinds of directions. We essentially get lost very easily. We're like sheep. We get lost very easily and find ourselves in danger very quickly, and then we say, God help us, please. Please. You see? So we need God. And Lent tells us that we do need God, you see. Our wills go in directions we don't expect. I had a friend who, for example, was told over and over to watch the road, didn't really sink in until she ran into the behind of a police car. Then things began to sink in a little bit. But otherwise was always fiddling with the radio or whatever, and happened to run into the back of a patrol car, and the officer was not particularly pleased by all of that. So we're not able to do things all by ourselves. Abraham, this great pillar of the faith, we would think, well, he would be able to do everything all by himself. Surely he would be able to do all things all by himself. He was a great pillar of the faith. No, there's only one thing that he could do, the same thing we can do. By faith, we can believe that Jesus made things right and is making us into a new creation, that God did what we couldn't do. By faith, Abraham believed in God, and that was reckoned to him as righteousness. We can have faith. That is one thing that we can do. We can believe that God can make us into new people, and we can believe that God can lead us into the right direction, even though we don't know at any given moment, perhaps, exactly which direction God is going to lead us into. Do you know what God said to Abraham? Leave your family, your father's land, leave the stuff that you have here, and go to a place that I will show you. Abraham said, okay. How many of us would do that? That's faith. That's faith. God said, I will make you into a great nation. Abraham said by faith, okay. He got old. Then he got real old. God came to him one day again and said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. He fell flat down on his face and laughed, the Bible says. And he said, look, I'm old, Sarah's old. There's no way. God said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Abraham said, okay. All right. Sarah gets old, he gets old. Finally, Isaac is born. You know what Isaac's name means? Laughter. Sarah laughed because both of them were too old to be made into a great nation, but there it was. And Sarah said, I'm laughing because this is not what I expected. All right, but God did it. God did it. They didn't do it. God did it. And sometimes I think God waits for Sarah and Abraham to get old so that God can say, okay, I can do this. You don't do it all by yourself, So the name of the kid was Laughter. Oh, what's your name? Laughter. My mother laughed because I was born, because she was too old to have children. Faith. The thing that brings us to the cross is not our own works, but faith. There are so many problems that we have and so many problems of this world that could be solved if we could just say, okay, God, I believe in you. I trust you. You're not revealing me all the details and so forth, but I trust you. I have faith that I will be following you. There's so many burdens that we would not have to bear if we could just say, I trust you, God. It's in your hands. It's in your hands, God, because I'm not able to do it myself. How many times have you been frustrated? How many times have you been fearful? How many times have you been tired? How many times have you been just dragging along, saying, I can't go another step. I can't take one more thing. And then you turn to God. You say, I'm going to give you all of this, God, in prayer, in faith. And I don't know where you're going to lead me, but I know that I have that. I know that I have faith. I don't know anything else. You see, how many times have we been on our last, our last nerve, and returned to God and said, I have faith. Abraham had faith, I have faith. I know you're going to lead me into a good place, God. And we don't know all the details. We have that open to us at Lent and all times. We have that open to us at all times. Life gives us many, many things that do not have specific, direct answers or answers that we can anticipate. We have a virus running around that nobody has ever seen before. There's always something in relation to that. I once talked to a realtor friend of mine and said, boy, that was a pretty terrible thing when that one meteor exploded over the Soviet Union, huh? In that one town there, they had a big loud noise and this meteor exploded, and he said, you know, Milo, there's always a meteor hurtling toward Earth or something. And I thought to myself, you know what? In our faith, no matter what it is, we can turn it over to God. And somehow, as an English bishop said, when I pray to God, coincidence happens. In other words, things happen. Somehow, things happen. But we think sometimes that we can do it all ourselves, and it's an impossible task. In Lent, we understand that we can't. But we can do one thing. We can, in faith, live humbly, having faith in God. God overcame sin and death. God can overcome what afflicts us. So at those times when you feel the most helpless and you turn to God in faith, you are the strongest. At those times when you feel the lowest and you turn to God in faith, you're on eagle's wings. At those times when you're at your wit's end and you turn to God in faith, like Abraham, you're the wisest. At those times when you're most powerless and you turn to God in faith, you're the most powerful. We can overcome all things through this faith. Amen.
You have been listening to St. Paul United Church of Christ, 2030 Plank Road, Keokuk. Join our worship service at 10 a.m. with fellowship hour immediately following. Until next week, may God bless.